It was late afternoon. The golden light of the setting sun filtered through the tall trees of the forest. The air was warm yet filled with a strange silence, the kind of silence that tells you something isn't right. A man named Adil was riding his motorbike slowly through the narrow road that cut through the heart of the jungle. This was his daily route and a shortcut home, but today something unusual was waiting for him on that lonely road. As he turned a bend, his eyes caught something lying still in the middle of the dusty path. At first he thought it might be just a large rock or a fallen tree branch, but as he got closer, he felt his heartbeat quicken. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't a branch. It was a lioness, thin, weak, and barely breathing. Adil stopped his bike suddenly. The tires made a screeching sound as dust rose around him. For a moment he just stared in disbelief. The lioness's ribs were visible through her skin. Her golden fur looked dull and covered in dirt. Her head rested helplessly on the ground, eyes half open as if fighting hard to stay conscious. Then he noticed something even more heartbreaking. Beside her was a tiny cub. The little one wasn't moving much. Its breathing was shallow, its body trembling with weakness. It looked as if it hadn't eaten for days. Adil's heart sank. He didn't dare move closer at first. Wild animals can be dangerous even when they're weak. But the lioness didn't even lift her head. There was no growl, no sign of aggression, only pain. He took a small step forward, whispering to himself, "Oh no, what happened to you two?" The scene before him was enough to bring tears to anyone's eyes. The mother lion, though sick and starving herself, had wrapped her body around her cub protectively. Even in weakness, she was trying to shield her baby from harm. Every few moments she nudged the cub gently with her nose, as if to make sure it was still alive. The cub gave a faint whimper, a sound so soft yet so full of sorrow. Adil looked around. The forest was eerily quiet. No sounds of birds, no rustling leaves. Just the faint breath of two souls fighting for life. He pulled out his phone. His hands trembled as he tried to get a signal. Nothing. He moved a few steps up the road, searching for a connection. Finally, a single bar appeared. He immediately dialed the local forest ranger office. "Hello. There's a lioness on the road. She's very weak. And her cub, too. Please send help quickly." The voice on the other end told him to stay calm and keep his distance. A rescue team would be sent right away. But Adil couldn't just stand there. He took out a bottle of water from his bag. Slowly, step by step, he moved closer. The lioness's eyes shifted toward him. For a second, he froze. Her eyes weren't fierce. They were filled with pain and fear. He knelt down a few meters away and poured a small amount of water into the cap of the bottle. Gently, he slid it forward with a stick. The lioness looked at it, then at him. After a few seconds, she weakly extended her tongue and licked the water. Adil sighed in relief. It's okay, he whispered softly. "Help is coming." The cub tried to move but fell back weakly against its mother's leg. It was clear that both were on the edge of survival. The man's heart broke at the sight. He could feel the raw bond between mother and child, the unspoken promise that no matter what, she would not leave her baby's side. Time seemed to move slowly. The orange light of evening began to fade into the pale blue of twilight. The forest started to come alive again with distant animal sounds. But here, in this small patch of road, everything felt frozen in time. Adil kept watch, occasionally checking if the rangers had arrived. The lioness, meanwhile, lay her head close to her cub's tiny body. At one moment, the cub stopped moving altogether. The mother nudged it again, gently, lovingly. Once, twice, 3 times, as if begging her baby to wake up. Adil felt a lump in his throat. The lioness let out a faint, low moan, the sound of a mother's grief. It was the kind of sound that needed no translation. He whispered under his breath, "Please, hold on. They're coming." Far away, the faint sound of a jeep engine echoed through the forest. Headlights flickered between the trees. The forest rangers had arrived. The vehicle stopped near Adil's bike. 3 officers jumped out quickly, carrying tranquilizer guns and medical kits. Adil ran to them and pointed toward the lioness. "There. Please hurry. I think the cub is dying." The rangers moved carefully. They spoke in low tones, assessing the situation. One of them raised the tranquilizer gun, but another stopped him. "No need," he said softly. "She's too weak to resist." They approached slowly. The lioness didn't move. Only her eyes followed them, tired, watery eyes full of sadness. When they tried to lift the cub, the mother let out a soft growl, not out of anger but fear. She didn't want them to take her baby away. One ranger knelt beside her, speaking gently. "Easy, Mama. We're here to help." They placed the cub carefully into a small animal crate with warm cloth beneath it. The cub barely moved. Its eyes were half open, breathing weakly. The lioness watched every movement, her gaze never leaving her child. When they finally brought out a stretcher for the mother, she tried to lift her head as if to check where they were taking the cub. Adil could see her struggling, trying to rise, but her body simply didn't have the strength. The rangers gently placed her onto the stretcher. For the first time, Adil noticed her wounds. Small cuts, marks on her paws, signs of hunger and exhaustion. It was clear she had been searching for food for days, maybe weeks, to feed her cub, but found nothing. As they loaded both mother and cub into the back of the rescue jeep, the lioness's eyes stayed fixed on her cub. Even as the doors closed, her gaze didn't break. Adil stood there, covered in dust and emotion. He could hardly believe what he had just witnessed, the raw power of a mother's love, even in the face of death. As the vehicle disappeared down the forest road, he whispered to himself, "Please, let them survive." The forest went silent again. Only the fading sound of the engine echoed through the trees. The rescue jeep raced through the forest road, bouncing over roots and stones as night began to fall. Inside, the lioness lay motionless on the stretcher, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Beside her crate, the tiny cub whimpered faintly, its cries weak but still alive, a fragile sound in the darkness. One of the forest rangers, a man named Rehan, kept his eyes on the cub the whole way. "We need to reach the wildlife hospital fast," he said in a tense voice. "They don't have much time." Adil followed behind them on his bike, his heart pounding with worry. The headlights cut through the misty air, revealing the silhouettes of trees rushing past. He couldn't stop thinking about the lioness's eyes, the way she had looked at her cub, even when she was too weak to move. It was an image that would never leave him. After nearly 40 minutes of rough driving, they reached the small wildlife care center near the forest's edge. The building was simple, white walls, bright lights, and the faint smell of medicine in the air. It wasn't a big city hospital, but it was a place of miracles for countless animals. As soon as the jeep stopped, a team of veterinarians and assistants rushed out. They lifted the stretcher and crate with care, moving quickly into the treatment area. Adil stood at the entrance, hesitant but desperate to know what would happen next. Inside, the scene was filled with urgency. Doctors checked the lioness's pulse, temperature, and breathing. Her body temperature was dangerously low. They inserted an IV line into her front leg, slowly giving her fluids. The cub was placed on a heating pad under a bright lamp to stabilize its weak heartbeat. One of the doctors, Dr. Sana, looked at Rehan with concern. "They're both severely dehydrated and malnourished," she said. "If we hadn't gotten them now, they wouldn't have made it through the night." The lioness's eyelids fluttered as she lay under observation. Every now and then she tried to lift her head, her instincts urging her to check on her cub. But her strength failed each time. Still, her ears twitched at every small sound the cub made. Even in weakness, her mother's heart refused to rest. Hours passed slowly. The night outside grew darker, filled with the hum of insects and the whisper of wind. Inside the room, soft beeps from medical monitors filled the air. The cub began to move a little more, its eyes blinking weakly under the warmth of the lamp. When Dr. Sana saw this, she smiled faintly. "The cub is responding," she said softly. "That's a good sign." Rehan let out a long breath of relief. "And the mother?" he asked. "She's stable for now," the doctor replied, "but she's still very weak. She must have gone many days without food. We'll need to feed her through a tube for a while." Adil watched all of this from behind the glass window. His eyes were wet, but he couldn't look away. He had seen something today that changed his heart forever, the true meaning of love and sacrifice. By morning, both mother and cub were resting. The cub now lay beside its mother, wrapped in a soft blanket. The lioness finally managed to lift her head and touch her cub's fur gently with her nose. For the first time, she let out a low, comforting purr, weak but full of emotion. It was the sound of hope returning. Days turned into weeks. Under the care of the veterinary team, the lioness began to regain her strength. Her eyes grew brighter, her breathing steadier. The cub, too, started to show signs of playfulness, often pawing at its mother's tail or curling against her belly. Adil visited the center often. Each time he arrived, the lioness would look at him, not with fear but recognition. It was as if she remembered the man who had stopped on that lonely road, the man who gave her water when she was at the edge of death. Dr. Sana noticed it too. "Animals never forget kindness," she said one morning. She knows he helped her. Sometimes when Adil sat quietly outside their enclosure, the cub would stumble toward the fence, curious and brave. Its small golden eyes would stare at him, and for a brief moment, the man and the wild creature would share a silent bond. By the 4th week, the transformation was remarkable. The lioness's fur had regained its shine, and she could now walk steadily. The cub was healthy, playful, and full of energy. It often climbed onto its mother's back, playfully biting her ears, while the lioness watched patiently, her tail swaying gently. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, the forest rangers gathered at the hospital gate. Rehan looked at Adil and said, "It's time. They're ready to go home." Adil's heart skipped a beat. "Back to the forest?" he asked. Rehan nodded with a proud smile. "Yes, they belong there. And thanks to you, they have another chance at life." The next morning, a small convoy of vehicles set out toward the same forest road where everything had begun. The lioness and her cub were placed gently inside a special transport cage lined with hay. They seemed calm, as if sensing that this journey was different, a journey toward freedom. Adil rode behind the rangers once again, just as he had that night weeks ago. But this time the forest looked alive. Sunlight danced through the leaves. Birds sang from the treetops. The air felt lighter, filled with the rhythm of life. When they reached a quiet clearing deep within the forest, the rangers stopped the jeep. Rehan gave a small nod, and 2 officers carefully opened the cage door. For a few seconds, the lioness didn't move. She stood at the edge of the opening, looking around, breathing in the wild air, the scent of home. Then slowly she stepped out onto the soft earth. The cub followed, stumbling slightly but excited. Everyone stood silently watching. The lioness turned her head once, glancing back at the people, at the humans who had saved her and her baby. Her eyes met Adil's one last time. In that gaze there was gratitude, deep, wordless, pure. Then she looked down at her cub, gave it a gentle nudge, and together they walked into the forest. The cub ran a few steps ahead, then turned and waited for its mother. The lioness followed, her stride strong and proud once again. As the 2 golden figures disappeared into the trees, the rustling of leaves was the only sound that remained. Adil stood still, a tear escaping his eye. "Go," he whispered softly. "You're safe now." Rehan placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did something beautiful," he said. "You reminded us that kindness isn't only for humans. Every life matters." The group slowly turned back toward the jeeps. The forest behind them shimmered in the sunlight, alive with the song of birds. Somewhere deep inside, the lioness and her cub were beginning a new chapter, a second chance gifted by compassion. Weeks later, the rangers placed small motion cameras in the area to monitor the released animals. What they saw left everyone smiling. One evening, the camera captured the lioness resting peacefully under a tree, her cub curled beside her, now stronger and more playful than ever. She looked healthy, content, her eyes calm and full of peace. The cub climbed onto her back, biting her ear playfully, while she rolled over with gentle patience. Dr. Sana watched the footage and smiled warmly. "She made it," she said softly. "They both did." The footage spread among the rescue team and volunteers, a reminder of how small acts of courage can change destinies. And for Adil, every time he rode through that forest road again, he slowed down at the same bend. The place where he once found despair was now filled with memories of hope. He would often stop for a few seconds, listening, hoping to catch even a faint roar or the sound of playful cubs in the distance. Sometimes, if the wind blew just right, he thought he could hear it, the echo of a mother's gentle call and a cub's happy reply. And in those moments he smiled, because he knew somewhere out there, 2 hearts that had once been broken were whole again. The mother who refused to leave her dying cub had been rewarded by fate itself. Her love had saved them both, and reminded the world that even in the wildest corners of the earth, love is the strongest force of all.